On the plane to Washington, Kevin was pressed by a strange woman to give him his qualification card for the pill-gathering battle. She assumed he was not an herbalist. Kevin put the woman off both on the plane and at the airport when they had landed, and when she again confronted him, demanded the card, and let her level 5 backers threaten Kevin. Kevin, though, was met by Herman Thompson's men who easily scared off the woman and her level 5 thugs, which made Kevin wonder about the power structure in his new home. "And you are?" Kevin furrowed his brows. It was a little strange how he couldn't tell the exact power base of these people, but he could certainly feel a different kind of spiritual energy emanating from their bodies. "My name is Aiden Glover, but you can just call me Aiden," the man answered him politely. "Shall we go now, Mr. Williams?" Kevin's mouth couldn't help but smirk a little when he heard this. This young man's ability to get familiar with others was extraordinary for his age. "Well," Kevin touched the tip of his nose, "I seem to have some things to deal with here. I'm afraid I can't leave with you just yet." "Oh, are these people considered to be of any importance?" Aiden Glover said formally as he glanced around without any change in his expression. Finally, his gaze landed on the woman. "May I ask where you're from? Mr. Williams is a guest of the Murphy family. If you know what's good for you, then I would suggest that you hurry up and get the hell out of my face." Aiden's tone shifted immediately, and he wasn't nearly as polite as he had been when he addressed Kevin. At the same time, a violent aura burst out from Aiden's body, surrounding the group of people with the spiritual energy. Suddenly, the woman's facial expression changed and she took more than 5 steps back while seemingly gasping for air as if she had just choked on something. "Mr. Williams, now that this matter has been settled, please come with us. Mr. Murphy and Mr. Thompson have been expecting your arrival at Mr. Murphy's home, so it's best if we don't keep them waiting." Aiden's expression changed very quickly once again as he turned his attention back to Kevin with a smile on his face. "All right." Kevin revealed a satisfied smile. To be honest, he didn't care about the woman. This kind of thing had happened many times before, so it wasn't worth him making a fuss. However, no one noticed that the woman had been staring furiously at Kevin's back as he got into the car. She then took special note of the license plate of the vehicle that he was in. At the same time, in the Healing Art School back in Chicago, Harley Shepard was playing another intense game of chess with Wayne Ford. The black and white pieces on the chessboard were moving like lions as they fiercely collided with each other. With both men intent on winning, even the slightest misstep by either of them would be caught mercilessly by the other. Given that, both of them had to be careful as they couldn't afford to make a wrong move. "I heard that Kevin has just gotten to Washington, D.C. Harley Shepard raised his right index finger and middle finger, which was holding a black chess piece between them. As he stared at the chessboard, his eyes were filled with a look of deep concentration.
"Is that so? Looks like he's now taken the jump from a small pond into a big lake. However, he better be careful. If he jumps too fast, he might not realize how much deeper it is."
Wayne Ford took a sip of coffee before he continued.
"For ordinary people, Washington, D.C. might be a magnificent place to visit, but for Kevin, it's not much different from that island where he battled the Vanguard's younger generation."
Without giving Harley Shepard any chance to speak, Wayne immediately added,
"To be honest, I really admire that kid, especially since he's never gone to the capital before. He's still so young, but that also means that he has plenty of time to gain some valuable experience there."
"You seem to be very open-minded. Aren't you afraid that the kid will be in over his head after he realizes that he can't play around in D.C.? If he thinks he can handle matters over there in the same way that he always has here, then he's barking up the wrong tree." Harley's face tensed up.
"Play around? After everything he's shown us, do you still think that Kevin is that kind of person? Besides, don't you remember who is standing behind him? If his mentor appears and says anything at all, the entire country will surely tremble 3 times over."
Wayne expressed without any worry.
"With his protection, how can Kevin still be threatened by anyone?
I can't be bothered with him. I can only blame him for being arrogant and stubborn if he ends up in trouble in Washington." A thunderous voice suddenly sounded. Upon hearing this, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard were stunned for a moment. Then they immediately stood up as a cool breeze blew open the office door. In a flash, a towering figure appeared in front of the window with his back facing the two old men.
"Greetings."
Not only was Wayne surprised, but he even appeared to be extremely cautious as he respectfully lowered his head to this person. Meanwhile, Harley Shepard was mindful enough to take 2 steps back before lowering his own head. He wanted to make enough space for the 2 people in front of him to communicate with one another. Compared to them, he clearly knew his position. Whether it was in terms of friendship or power base, he didn't feel like he had the right to speak to this person.
"Why didn't you stop Kevin from going to Washington?" the man asked in a serious tone.
Who else in the world could say such words besides Kevin's mysterious and elusive mentor, the Night King?
"I didn't expect it to happen so soon. However, it's not necessarily a bad thing for Kevin to experience some challenges at such a young age."
Wayne slightly lowered his head as he tried to answer him carefully.
"How much hardship can he endure? While it's true that his potential needs to be carved, don't you understand that even the strongest diamond can fracture under extreme pressure?"
The Night King's tone suddenly intensified as a powerful force burst out from his body. Wayne Ford, who was right in front of him, let out a muffled groan, but his body didn't move at all. Instead, a faint purple light came from his body to help him withstand this pressure. However, compared to him, Harley Shepard wasn't as fortunate. Despite having some distance between them, his face instantly turned pale, and he was forced to take a few steps back while feeling as though he was suffocating. While Harley Shepard did his best not to make any sounds to indicate the pain that he was feeling, the difference in power base between him and Wayne Ford was obvious.
"Everything should be done according to one's current abilities. Don't you understand the principle of too hard and easy to break at such an old age?"
While the Night King declared that he didn't care about Kevin's life or death, he had clearly been thinking about it deeply before he came by.
"This matter may not be as serious as you think. You may not care whether Kevin is your disciple or not, but he is also a student of the Healing Arts School. As such, our word still holds some weight in Washington, D.C., and I have already arranged for someone to take care of him if and when the time comes. Moreover, Kevin is a member of the Reaper Squad, and Herman Thompson has also traveled to D.C. all the way from St. Louis just to help him. Therefore, he isn't as isolated as he appears on the surface. On the contrary, there's actually a large group of people behind him who can help him."
In just a few seconds, Wayne Ford had shared all the things that he could think of to satisfy the Night King. It seemed that he had already analyzed the situation thoroughly. At the same time, it could be said that his quick thinking had been spurred by his fear of the Night King's strength, thinking that the Night King would continue to vent his anger on him if he wasn't able to provide any assurances. As he had expected after hearing his words, the Night King's anger appeared to have been lessened temporarily.
"Deep down, I actually believe that you also understand very well that Kevin is quite the outstanding figure among the younger generation. Given this, I'm sure that he has already considered all the possibilities since he dared to go to Washington, D.C. by himself. Even so, there are so many people who are secretly taking care of him, so it won't be easy for something bad to happen to him."
Wayne suppressed the anxiety in his heart enough to share more of his thoughts.
"You know I'm not here to listen to your nonsense."
The Night King stood behind him with one hand behind his back. The coldness in his tone didn't diminish in the slightest. Wayne took a deep breath.
"I know that you're here to denounce me for my failure to stop Kevin, but all my words today aren't excuses for myself. I just want you to understand that I'm not a person who doesn't know right from wrong. That being said, some things are hard to predict, and Kevin's actions aren't something that we can always control."
Not waiting for Wayne Ford to finish speaking, the Night King suddenly waved his right hand. Without any visible sign of spiritual energy being used, No one even saw how he attacked. However, Harley Shepard could see that Wayne Ford seemed to have suffered a heavy blow, and he couldn't exert the full strength of his power base to protect himself from the impact this time around. As he curled up on the floor in pain, his face flushed red, and there were even some traces of blood in the corner of his mouth. "Wayne!" Harley was stunned for a moment. Then he immediately became furious. At this moment, he didn't have time to think about how the Night King did it. He just wanted to rush toward Wayne Ford to check on his condition. However, a second later, he was shocked to find that he couldn't even move a finger. There seemed to be another invisible force that had sealed his power base completely, making him look like an ordinary old man with white hair.
"Don't come any closer."
Wayne had been Harley Shepard's brother for more than half of his life. How could he not know the temper of his old friend? Therefore, the first thing he did after enduring the pain was to prevent Harley Shepard from coming near him. After all, if the Night King really wanted to kill him, he wouldn't have any chance of surviving even with Harley Shepard's help. And even if he really wanted to fight the Night King, he might only have a 10 to 20% chance of winning at best, even after gathering all of the most powerful warriors of the Foundation together. Wayne Ford coughed a few times and his legs trembled as he slowly stood up from the ground. Still, even with bloodstains on his long white beard, his face and eyes showed no signs of hatred or fear at the moment.
Thank you, Night King."
Wayne took a few deep breaths to try to steady himself. When he heard this, Harley Shepard was stunned. Wayne Ford had just been beaten to the point of spitting up blood, yet he still wanted to thank the Night King for it. "Now that you understand what I'm thinking, at least I didn't waste my time in coming here." The Night King gently waved his right hand and disappeared in a flash without even looking at Harley Shepard, who was now standing beside him. In his eyes, Harley wasn't worth his attention. "As his mentor, consider this as a reminder given to you for trying to put yourself in Kevin's shoes and speaking on his behalf for too long." The Night King's voice was still echoing in the office, but they didn't know where he had gone. At the entrance of a mansion in the northwestern part of Washington, D.C., the words Murphy family were written on a fiery red plaque. Each letter gave off a feeling of importance and respect. The first thing Kevin noticed when he got out of the car was not how magnificent the mansion was, but the two sculptures placed at the entrance. Unlike other prominent figures whose stone statues were usually of fierce animals like lions and tigers, there were two gentle-looking eagles instead. In the past, this man must have been an important government figure. A faint smile appeared on Kevin's face as he muttered softly, "Mr. Williams, this way, please. Mr. Murphy and Mr. Thompson are waiting for you in the study." Aidan Glover respectfully extended his hand and gestured. Kevin was about to be ushered into what he knew were the halls of power in the most important city in the country. Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard were discussing Kevin's arrival in Washington, D.C. when the Night King appeared. The Night King didn't think that Kevin could endure much hardship there, even with his current abilities. He angrily sent a powerful force through both Wayne and Harley for failing to stop Kevin. Back in Washington, D.C., Aidan Glover had brought Kevin to the Murphy family's mansion from the airport. Seeing the two statues of docile eagles at the entrance, Kevin figured that Mr. Murphy used to be an important government figure. After staring at the two eagle sculptures for a few seconds, Kevin followed Aidan Glover and passed through the marble entryway that led into the mansion. The interior of the Murphy family's mansion was decorated in a magnificent manner. As soon as Kevin entered, he saw a rifle under the head of a fierce tiger hanging on the wall. Herman Thompson and another old man were sitting in the study off to the right, slowly drinking their coffee. "Kevin, you're finally here. Please sit down and have a chat with us." Herman Thompson seemed very enthusiastic when he saw Kevin. "Let me introduce you to the owner of this magnificent home. This is my old friend Donald Murphy." "As in the famous Donald Murphy?" Kevin's eyes widened when he heard that. He looked at the old man in disbelief. Growing up, almost all of the people in Kevin's generation had learned the names of a few legendary figures in school. And one of those famous names from the past was Donald Murphy.
Don't be so surprised, kid. I'm no different from you guys. It's not like this old man has 3 heads and 6 arms.
Donald Murphy replied with a smile as he kept looking at Kevin. He really wanted to see what was so special about this young man who was so respected by Herman Thompson that he even risked his own life just to help him. "No wonder you had those eagle statues out in front," Kevin murmured. "You went from being a decorated war veteran to having a long career in government while serving our country well by working hard to protect ordinary people."
You're very smart to be able to recall my background in just a single sentence. But while you're right on all those accounts, no matter how glorious those days were, that's all in the past. Now I'm just an old man who's long retired from service and is getting closer to the end with every passing day.
Donald became somber. The meaning behind his words was deep. Perhaps only the 3 people present could truly understand it. Meanwhile, in the conference room of the Williams Company in Chicago, many influential people gathered early in the morning. Today was the first official day of the Prestige Club following the Business Alliance's establishment. Regardless of what they were thinking in their hearts and whether they had any evil ideas that no one knew about, everyone seemed to be on the same page at the moment, at least from the looks of it. After all, small matters like this meeting had to be attended to as a sign of support. Right now, everyone's gaze had shifted over to the person at the head of the table. Lily, who was currently dressed in professional attire, had an expression in her eyes that conveyed her mixed feelings.
Mrs. Williams, please forgive me as I'm a straightforward person. Before President Williams left, he established the Prestige Club, and his original intention for this business alliance was to gain benefits for everyone. But what exactly did he mean when he said that he would leave the Williams Company for you to manage? How will that affect us? One of the business leaders spoke up. Running a business is not a joke. Given that the business climate is constantly changing, it's inevitable for someone inexperienced to be a little hesitant when doing things. As such, I'm afraid that you have yet to understand all the related matters of the Williams Company. Am I right, Mrs. Williams?
Another expressed some concern. Actually, none of us have any objections to the Williams Company being at the Prestige Club's forefront. After all, this company is the biggest and most powerful one in this alliance. However, it might be in everyone's interest if the person who leads us isn't the one who's currently in charge of the Williams Company. After all, she's still learning the ropes of her own company, so we shouldn't overwhelm her. In short, what I mean is that perhaps someone like Mr. Squire or Miss Wright or even Mr. Dawn would be a more suitable candidate to lead the Prestige Club, a third one proposed. All of these influential figures were talking at the same time. Their intentions were obvious. Lily was just a newbie at this level of the corporate world. Why should their futures bank on her success or failure, knowing that whoever was named leader could be in a position to do more or less whatever they wanted? If Kevin hadn't left, they would be fine with him as a leader. After all, no one dared to provoke him with his powerful strength. But now that there was no longer a tiger ruling over the mountain, any of them could be named the king just as easily as Lily could. As such, they all started to assert themselves as a more deserving candidate. "Are you all saying that you want me to give up my position as leader of the Prestige Club?" Lily looked at the people in the conference room with a cold expression. Before coming here, she already expected that she might encounter many unpleasant things in this role, but she never would have thought that the group of people who were all very respectful to Kevin just this morning would become so arrogant again as soon as he left. "Miss Williams, please don't misunderstand. No one said that." One of the leaders shook his head slyly. "The Williams Company is President Williams' business, after all. Who would dare to offend his reputation?" Another one waved his hands innocently. "We're merely stating facts and looking after everyone's interests. This business alliance shouldn't revolve around a single company. especially when that company is in a transitional period. Surely you must agree that this could have negative consequences for everyone." A third one tried to briefly explain the bigger picture. This group of people all replied one after another with smiles on their faces as they sat lazily in their chairs. It seemed that none of them took the meeting seriously. They honestly didn't care about Lily's position of authority and only saw her as someone that they could push around. Meanwhile, in Kevin's office, Tyler, Dawn, Adriana Wright, and Rachel were sitting on the sofa while watching the meetings footage from the computer screen. Dalton Steele, Gilbert Rhodes, and Emo Squire were also there. "This group of people is too much. Do they actually dare to show off their strength so arrogantly to Lily? I'm going to go over there and teach them a lesson." Rachel couldn't tolerate her best friend being bullied like this. "Sit down." Tyler Dawn slightly raised his eyes and looked at Rachel, who had just stood up from the sofa. "Director Dawn, please don't try to stop me. Lily is like a good sister to me. I can't just sit here and do nothing when she's faced with this kind of treatment. Besides, she's Kevin's wife. Do you think he wants to see her being disrespected and taken advantage of by them?" Rachel told him in an unfriendly tone. "I told you to sit down." Tyler didn't look at Rachel anymore. Instead, he focused his attention on his computer screen. Gilbert Rhodes gave her a look indicating that she should listen to Tyler. "Lily's matter is only just beginning, so let's give her a chance and see how things play out. Unless it's a last resort, none of us can interfere with her way of handling things." Tyler's index finger lightly tapped on the table. "It's impossible for her to keep growing as a leader if we're there to shield her every time. Since Kevin handed the Williams Company over to her for the time being, then she must learn how to navigate the situation and develop the ability to protect herself." Meanwhile, in the study of the Murphy family's mansion, Donald, Murphy, and Kevin were talking about a lot of things while Herman Thompson just sat in a chair to their side and was content with occasionally joining in on their conversation.
"Kid, now that you have arrived in D.C., do you have any other plans?"
Donald Murphy took a sip of coffee and asked faintly. Even from the conversation earlier, Donald had already felt the difference between this young man and himself. From the way he spoke, he could tell that while Kevin was still young, he was mature. He also looked at things differently from other men and women of his age. Because of this, Donald had also become very interested in Kevin. He wanted to see how far this young man could go in Washington, D.C., and whether he was worth the Murphy family placing a huge bet on him as Herman Thompson had suggested. "Frankly speaking, I don't have a specific plan yet. This is only my first day, so I'm still very much an outsider who doesn't know much about the situation in Washington. When I left Chicago, all I wanted to do was participate in the upcoming competition held by the Herbalist Society. We'll see how things go after that." Kevin shrugged his shoulders as he gave an honest answer. Every place had its own set of rules that an outsider had to adjust to. Although Kevin didn't lack money, he was currently in Washington. It was impossible for his power and reputation in Chicago to be transferred here like a simple bank transaction. At the moment, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the capital was already packed with people who all wanted a piece of the pie. Given this, how could they simply allow an outsider to step in and try his luck?
"It's normal to be blind at the start, especially when you're just trying to get your feet wet. But the pool of water here in D.C. runs deep. Without a kind and experienced person leading the way, it'll be easy to lose your way and drown."
Donald Murphy held the cup of coffee in his hand as his mind continuously pondered.
"I have a grandson who is about the same age as you. He just went out with Herman's grandson Kyle earlier today. I'm sure you'll get along when you meet him."
Donald Murphy's grandson? He must be a rising star in this city following in his grandfather's footsteps. The corner of Kevin's mouth curled slightly as he thought about this to himself. The fact that Donald Murphy wanted his grandson to interact with him proved the goodwill of the Murphy family. The afternoon quickly passed in idle chatter. As evening fell, Herman Thompson and Donald Murphy went out together. But shortly after that, Kyle Thompson and another young man had returned to the Murphy's family mansion. "Mr. Williams!" Kyle lowered his head to Kevin respectfully and then pointed to the young man next to him. "Let me introduce someone to you. This is my good friend, Carson Murphy." "Hello." Kevin smiled and nodded at the young man. "Mr. Williams, I've heard about you in the news. You are indeed a handsome man in person." Carson Murphy slightly raised his head and spoke arrogantly to Kevin. "You're too kind. It would be too arrogant of me to accept your compliment. I'm sure that you're a rising star here in D.C. Kevin put on a fake smile and greeted him. The atmosphere between them was a little awkward. "Now that you've arrived here in D.C., let me take you out to fully experience what the city has to offer. I guarantee that you won't ever want to go back home once you experience the nightlife here." Carson ignored Kevin and turned around to walk out the door. Kyle followed Kevin with some guilt. "Kevin, I'm so sorry for that. Carson does have a tendency to be quite full of himself. But you have to believe me. Other than that, he doesn't have any big problems. You'll just need to find a chance to show him what you're all about to make him respect you." Kevin patted his shoulder lightly. Obviously, he didn't dwell on this. It was inevitable for some rich young men to be carefree and self-indulgent. It was just that his behavior was very different compared to what he had imagined. Was it the same for his grandfather back then? Soon, the three of them arrived at a luxurious nightclub downtown. The huge underground parking lot was filled with luxury cars that were worth millions of dollars. "It seems like the owner of this nightclub must be quite a big shot to be running such a lucrative business," Kevin remarked in a low voice. "Huh, you have good eyesight. This is actually a business controlled by the Herbalist Society." Carson glanced at Kevin and smiled. "The Herbalist Society? Aren't they focused on refining pills? Why would they have a nightclub?" Kevin asked with some surprise. "Isn't it necessary to have a lot of capital in order to refine pills at their scale? The Herbalist Society is a large organization and there are many branches all across the country. With lots of overhead and salaries to pay for, their daily expenses are astronomical. As for the pills themselves, aside from their herbal ingredients being expensive to source, not everyone can just refine pills with minimal wastage, and this further drives up the cost. Furthermore, the prices of the pills produced by the Herbalist Society are controlled by the government, so they can't be too expensive. Otherwise, the public won't be able to afford what they sell. So without the support of other profit-generating businesses to fund their operations, I'm afraid the Herbalist Society would have already ceased to exist a long time ago." Carson walked in front and explained. What surprised Kevin was that he could clearly hear from his tone that Carson Murphy seemed to be looking down on the Herbalist Society. What did this mean? While Kevin was thinking about these things, the elevator door to the nightclub suddenly opened, and just as he was about to step inside, he accidentally bumped into someone.
"What the hell? Watch where you're going, will you? Don't you have eyes?"
The man covered his forehead in pain and roared. Interested in seeing what Kevin could achieve in Washington, D.C., Donald Murphy suggested that his grandson Carson could serve as his guide around the capital. When they were introduced, Carson seemed to be a carefree and indulgent type as he offered to show Kevin a glimpse of the city's nightlife. Upon arriving at a luxurious nightclub, Carson revealed that it was actually owned by the Herbalist Society, which needed profit-generating businesses to fund its daily operations. Just as they were about to get into the elevator, Kevin was too distracted by Carson's words that he accidentally bumped into a man. "I'm sorry." Kevin slightly furrowed his brows and apologized. Given that it was really his fault, he had no choice but to admit his mistake.
"Apologizing is useless. Look at my expensive shoes after you stepped on them. They're ruined."
As the man spoke, he stretched out his right foot. A footprint could be clearly seen on his originally shiny black leather shoe.
"You're going to regret this,"
he said. When Carson Murphy saw the argument, he simply leaned against the wall and crossed his arms in front of his chest. It seemed like he didn't have the slightest intention of helping Kevin. At the same time, Kyle Thompson's face darkened. But just as he was about to walk up to them and come to Kevin's defense, he was suddenly stopped by Carson. Let him handle it himself, he urged Kyle. Despite what Kevin thought earlier, Carson Murphy wasn't as self-absorbed as he looked. He knew what his grandfather thought in his heart. Like them, the Thompson family was also known as one of the noble families in the capital before moving to St. Louis. Therefore, although he wasn't completely certain, he had at least some idea regarding Herman Thompson's character. And since Herman Thompson valued Kevin so much, Carson Murphy was also curious to see what kind of strength this man possessed. Kyle Thompson moved his lips and wanted to say something, but he ultimately decided to keep his thoughts to himself. However, the expression on his face had clearly soured a little. A misunderstanding doesn't need to be so serious, does it? Kevin slightly raised his hands. He didn't want to make things worse. Despite his strength, he was still an outsider who was navigating his way around the capital. Because of this, he didn't want to ruffle any feathers and cause a scene tonight, as doing so might create the wrong first impression on people.
There's no need. Do you think this is just a small matter? How am I supposed to just brush off being stepped on by someone like you?
The man roared and didn't care about the curious gazes of the people around him. He then pointed at Kevin and shoved him. I'm telling you one last time, this is just a small matter. I know that this was all my fault, but I have already apologized to you for it. But if you still want to cause trouble without reason, then I won't be so polite to you anymore. Kevin's face gradually became gloomy. Even though he had taken the high road by repeatedly backing away to avoid conflict, this man still kept trying to provoke his anger. And he wasn't going to let this man bully him around any longer.
What did you say? The music here is too loud for me to hear clearly.
The man continued to taunt him as he arrogantly tilted his head and placed his hand on his ear. Facing such a situation, Kevin felt like he didn't have a choice but to teach this man a lesson. With this, he first took a deep breath. Then he suddenly punched the man in the face.
What the hell?
The man held his face in pain and took a few steps back. He then cursed at Kevin.
You piece of trash! You're going to regret this. Stay right here. I'm going to get someone to deal with you.
The man stared at Kevin with eyes full of hatred before quickly disappearing into the depths of the nightclub. It was only at this moment that Carson Murphy and Kyle Thompson slowly walked over. The two of them didn't mention anything specific about what had happened. Not bad. You have some guts. Carson had a knowing smile on his face, but his words carried a double meaning. It's just a small matter. Kevin waved his hand gently. Of course, he could tell what Carson Murphy was thinking. However, since there were many people on the scene, there was no need to speak too directly. After all, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to be so frank about certain things. Since this was just a small matter, I'm sure you can handle yourself very well in the future. Carson shrugged his shoulders casually, but Kevin knew that he was hiding a knife behind his smile. When he heard this, Kyle Thompson wanted to say something, but Kevin stopped him with his eyes. Suddenly, there was a rush of footsteps as a dozen men began to approach them. The leader of the group was the man who had been hit by Kevin.
What the hell? Are you really not afraid of death? You really stayed here instead of running away like a coward?
The man raised his head arrogantly and shouted at Kevin from a distance. Carson Murphy frowned slightly at the sight of this, but he chose to take a step back as if it had nothing to do with him. Mr. Williams, do you want me to help you deal with them? Kyle wasn't indifferent this time. Instead, he wanted to help Kevin get out of this problem as soon as possible. Otherwise, if something bad happened to Kevin, he wouldn't be able to explain this matter to his grandfather when they got back. But before Kevin could say anything, Carson Murphy smiled and remarked, Kyle, don't be so meddlesome. Since Mr. Williams said that this was just a small matter, he must already have his own solution. Thus, I'm sure he can handle this on his own. It seemed that there was no such thing as a free lunch here in the capital, as everything had to come with a price. Given that Donald and Carson Murphy had no idea why Herman Thompson valued Kevin so much, they wanted to see for themselves what Kevin had to offer before showing him any form of support. Under such circumstances, if they couldn't see anything useful from Kevin, then the Murphy family wouldn't dare to place their bet on him. While the Thompson family was considered a titan in the Midwest, the Murphy family wasn't any weaker than they were. In fact, the deep waters in Washington, D.C. weren't something that the Midwest could compare with. Regardless of whether it was a family or an organization, the opportunities to transform from a small player to a giant behemoth here were terrifying. And although the slow and steady approach could always make one's foundation stronger over time, the competition here was too fierce for someone to walk that path without being left behind. Given this, the Murphy family was already considered a powerful force in Washington, D.C. But whether it was Carson Murphy, his grandfather Donald, or some other member of the Murphy family, they all hoped that their family could advance further in the future by making a big move. But at the same time, they had to be very careful not to take that step unless they were sure to win with it. Otherwise, who knew how many people were hiding in the dark, waiting for the Murphy family to make a mistake? As long as there was a crack that they could exploit, they would strike immediately without mercy until nothing was left. In the meantime, since nothing major had happened yet, if they wanted to test Kevin's strength, they could only get a glimpse of the bigger picture through some smaller opportunities like tonight. Carson! Kyle finally couldn't help but call him out for not wanting to help. I already told you that Mr. Williams has his own way of dealing with this matter. As such, we shouldn't meddle in other people's business. Carson frowned slightly. He was surprised by Kyle Thompson's firm stance. Kyle, he's right. This is just a small matter. Let me handle it on my own. Kevin patted Kyle Thompson's shoulder. At this time, a dozen men arrived in front of Kevin.
Why are you still here? Should I make fun of you for not having a brain, or should I praise you for being brave?
The man lightly shook his head. Before I deal with you, I have a question. What's your name? Kevin raised his head slightly and asked fearlessly.
My name is Drew Goodwin, the man sneered. Make sure you remember it.
Enough. There's no need to say so much. I'm just asking what your name is before I teach you a lesson. Kevin waved his hand and interrupted Drew Goodwin. Now, come and show me what you've got. If you want to bully me, then you have to prove your abilities to me first.
After living here in the city for so long, this is the first time I've met such a bold person. Judging from your arrogance, you're not from around here, are you? I really don't know where you got your confidence from.
Drew Goodwin scoffed at him.
Even if I don't succeed in teaching you a lesson tonight, do you really think that there's no one in D.C. who can put you in your place? We can't allow outsiders like you to act so rudely towards us locals.
Drew's words suddenly prompted the other men and women in the crowd to look at Kevin with disdain. For a moment, countless curse words lingered in their mouths. A few men even began to knead their fists to show that they were ready to fight. If you don't have anyone else to help you, I think you'll probably be the one who's going to be put in his place tonight. Kevin lightly shook his head. Not waiting for the others to react, Kevin moved his right leg and fiercely kicked Drew's chest. Everyone present only heard a muffled sound before they saw a figure fly backward. With a heavy thud, Drew Goodwin crashed into the wall at the other end of the hallway, causing blood to come out from his mouth. At this moment, he felt as if he had been attacked by a wild bear, and all of the bones in his body had suffered different degrees of damage. You guys really shouldn't have chosen to provoke me tonight, Kevin told Drew Goodwin and the others who followed him in a pitiful tone. After that, a gloomy look flashed across his eyes, and he suddenly charged towards the dozen men. A series of slapping sounds immediately rang out as Kevin swept through the dozen men who tried to defend Drew Goodwin just moments ago, leaving them in the same state as their leader. Tonight was obviously a very small matter. The only reason why things have become like this is because you chose to make a big issue out of it and tried to bully me with numbers. So you can only blame yourselves for the sorry state you're in now. Kevin didn't bother to look into the eyes of the people around him as he lowered his head slightly and looked at the men on the floor. How dare you hit me? One of the men complained as he winced in pain.
Let me tell you that this matter isn't over yet.
Another swore in anger. Hey, why don't you tell us who you are? That way I can hunt you down when the time comes, a third one asked. Seeing this group of young men weakly clamoring despite helplessly lying on the ground, perhaps this was a habit of spoiled rich kids. Even if they couldn't gain any advantage against Kevin, their mouths still barked endlessly at him as they still refused to admit their mistakes. "My name is Kevin Williams. Come and find me when you have the time." Kevin suddenly stopped talking and glanced at Carson Murphy, who was currently standing beside him. For some reason, Carson Murphy suddenly had a bad feeling when they briefly locked eyes. As expected, Kevin paused for a while and then added, "By the way, I'm a good friend of the Murphy family's young heir, Carson Murphy. If you can't find me, you can simply go and find him. Neither of us will allow the other to be bullied." Carson shouted angrily when he heard this. "Kevin, you—" "Carson, don't worry. I'm sure you can handle this kind of situation without needing any help. After all, we both agree that it's just a small matter, right?" Kevin quickly stopped what Carson Murphy wanted to say. His face then revealed a cheap smile. "By the way, how do you feel after witnessing this thrilling scene? Moreover, how are we going to spend the rest of the night? Perhaps we'll need to move to a bigger stage?" This move was really impressive. It almost made Carson Murphy lose control of his emotions. And when he saw Kevin's mischievous smile, he really wanted to give him a slap in the face. However, his mind remained rational enough to tell himself that he couldn't do that. After all, he was the young heir of the Murphy family. So if he lost his composure now and fought Kevin, who had just arrived here as his family's guest, in public, it would only cause a huge embarrassment for his family. And deep down, Carson wasn't sure that he would be successful if he challenged this newcomer to a battle. After Kevin handily defeated Drew Goodwin and a dozen others, the spoiled rich kids vowed revenge. Kevin dared them to find him and his good friend Carson Murphy. Kevin threw in Carson's name to turn the tables on Carson, by using his own logic for not extending help earlier. While this angered Carson, he knew that he couldn't afford to embarrass the Murphy family in public by fighting Kevin, who then asked him how they were going to spend the rest of the night. Seeing this tense exchange between the two, Kyle Thompson found himself in a somewhat difficult position. Of course, he could tell that Kevin was deliberately making fun of Carson Murphy to teach him a lesson. But as Carson's good friend for many years, he couldn't do anything about it. However, Kyle really wanted to laugh at this interaction, and for a moment he almost couldn't hold it in. Meanwhile, Carson Murphy's chest rose and fell violently a few times as he seethed in anger. He then took a few deep breaths, which made the fury in his heart subside a little. "The night is still young, so of course we have to keep enjoying ourselves. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste of your first day in DC if we headed home this early?" Carson Murphy gritted his teeth and added, "Let's go upstairs. There are still many things to explore here tonight." After saying this, Carson didn't even look at Kevin. He let out a cold snort and quickly went upstairs. Only then did Kyle reveal a cheeky smile as he gave Kevin a thumbs up before the two of them quickly followed. Nowadays, many people tend to rush toward big cities in hopes of living a better life. However, no matter how prosperous and eye-catching a city was, how many people could truly live a carefree life there? Kevin never understood the point of reveling in this kind of lifestyle. While it was normal to enjoy a night out every now and then, it seemed that some of these young people were spending most days looking forward to a good time in places like this. No matter how much money these people had, was there any real fulfillment in chasing these types of fleeting moments in their lives? Or were they simply escaping from the realities of everyday life? Moreover, how many of them could have a clear conscience knowing that they didn't work hard to achieve something greater? Because of this, Kevin suddenly felt that while he had just started on his journey here, he had already begun to regret it. However, it was easier said than done for Kevin to stop now. It had been hard to put everything into place for this journey, and if he wanted a chance to truly live in peace in the future, he had to see this through until the end. Otherwise, if he simply tried to avoid or escape his responsibilities, he would be at risk of being pulled down by countless people with ulterior motives. For now, Kevin didn't need to worry about these matters. He just had to leave these people behind him and hope that the rest of the night would go smoothly. The three of them went up to the second floor one after another. Kevin saw that Carson's and Kyle's positions in DC meant that the nightclub they chose was very large, being 3 stories high. Moreover, every floor had a unique design, and the guests that each floor hosted were also different. However, what surprised Kevin was that a guest of Carson Murphy's status could only reach the second floor at most. As for the third floor, he couldn't even step foot on the stairs. Through Kevin's observation, he noticed that there were only some regular bouncers maintaining order on the first floor. As for the bouncers on the second floor, it seemed that they gave guests a sense of fear and intimidation. Although Kevin couldn't sense any spiritual energy coming from them, he figured that they still weren't easy to deal with, especially for the average person. Carson Murphy moved into the crowded space easily, and as soon as he entered, Kevin's ears were filled with loud music. At the same time, about 100 young and attractive men and women were drinking and dancing in the middle of the dance floor. This way! Carson glanced at Kevin, who was behind him, as he walked over to the right side to sit down and relax. The second floor was only a few thousand square feet. While the middle of the space served as the dance floor, all 4 corners were lined with sofas, tables, and bars. "Look who it is!" A young man in a suit walked up to Carson Murphy and greeted him warmly. "Carson, why didn't you bring your sister here tonight?" "It's none of your business. If you have nothing better to do, just leave us alone." Carson clearly wasn't in the mood to talk to this person. Kevin saw that the man sensed this, so he just rubbed his chin awkwardly and joined the rest of the crowd in the middle of the dance floor. It couldn't be helped that people would approach Carson Murphy given his identity. However, it seemed that his mood was quite unpredictable depending on who came over. Not long after, another 2 men who wore flashy outfits walked over. One of them patted Carson on the shoulder. "What's going on tonight, Carson?" "Nothing much. I'm just looking to relax a bit," Carson told them as he sat down on the sofa in a carefree manner. As soon as he did, he immediately attracted the attention of a group of women who were sitting together nearby. 2 of them, who were quite good-looking and who were wearing revealing clothes, walked over and immediately sat beside Carson, with one on his left and the other on his right. "Carson, what has been keeping you busy recently? It's been a while since we've seen you here." One of the women greeted him with a sweet voice. "Do you know how much I've missed you?" The other added as she gave him a light nudge. This time Carson didn't seem to be bothered by the company. There was even a slight smile on his face. "I've just been busy with some family matters these past few days." After saying that, Carson turned his attention to Kevin, who was standing beside him. When he saw Kevin looking at the surroundings with his eyes wide open, Carson wondered why this man seemed to be so taken aback by the scene. Given this, Carson figured Kevin was simply not a fan of nightclubs. At the same time, he couldn't help but remember the matter of Kevin deliberately messing with him earlier. Putting these 2 things together, how could he find a way to get back at him? "Why are you all standing there? Come and sit down with us. Kevin, these are my good friends, Kurt Eubanks and Mario Kessler. You guys should get to know each other." Carson crossed his legs with his back against the sofa. His arm then wrapped around the shoulder of the woman on his left, while the one on his right leaned on his shoulder as she handed him a glass of wine. It was starting to be a good night for Carson Murphy. Only after hearing Carson's introduction did the 2 men notice Kevin. Upon doing so, Kurt Eubanks and Mario Kessler instantly frowned. The 2 of them had known Carson since childhood. This was because their 3 families had been friends since their grandfather's time. Therefore, the friendship between them was very tight. At the same time, they belonged to a very small circle, and all of the people who belonged to it were young heirs from wealthy and powerful families in DC. However, in all of their interactions with Carson Murphy, this was the first time that they had seen or heard about Kevin. As such, they had no impression of this person at all. And logically speaking, regardless of his identity, there was no need for Carson Murphy to bring outsiders into their circle.
You seem unfamiliar. Are you from DC? Why haven't I seen you around before?
Kurt Eubanks picked up a drink from the table and slowly handed it over to Kevin. I'm just new here, but I'm slowly getting to know this place and everyone in it. Kevin took the glass naturally. After hesitating a moment, he added, I think you'll be hearing my name often as well in the future. You're quite confident about your prospects here in DC, aren't you? Mario Kessler said as he walked over. He then remarked, In that case, I think we'd better show you a good time. When these words came out of his mouth, the surrounding people who overheard this all started to chuckle, especially the two women on either side of Carson. At first, everyone thought that the man who came here with Carson Murphy was either the young heir of some rich and powerful family or the son of a high-ranking government official. However, Kevin's words just now proved that he was really nothing but an outsider. Moreover, these women had sharper eyes than most people. With only a glance at Kevin from head to toe, they could immediately tell that his net worth couldn't compare with these other young men. Therefore, not only did they give up on the idea of getting close to Kevin, but they also looked at him with some disdain. Oh, I don't need any special treatment. We should get along fine as long as you don't stand in my way. Kevin raised his glass and lightly nodded to Mario Kessler. Hey, Carson, is your friend really this arrogant? I tried to make small talk with him, but he dared to threaten me. After Mario turned around to speak to Carson, he shifted his attention back to Kevin. But this time, the smile on his face had completely disappeared. Besides, didn't you understand what I said? I wasn't praising you just now, you fool. There's no need to be so hostile when meeting someone for the first time, right? Kevin pulled over Kyle Thompson, who could no longer hold himself back, and had signaled for him to not be too rash. At this moment, Kevin even felt a little lucky that he didn't ask Dalton Steele to come with him here. Otherwise, the chances for tonight to end peacefully would be incredibly slim. No need? Kurt frowned and his tone suddenly became cold. Who the hell do you think you are? Don't think that just because you're standing here and having a drink, you can just say and do whatever you want. Do you even know that if it wasn't for Carson, you would never have been able to get onto this floor tonight in the first place? How dare you be so arrogant? Why don't you take a look at yourself in the mirror to remember who you are? You're nothing but a lowly outsider compared to us. Before you speak, you have to think carefully first about who you're with. There isn't one person here that you can dare to mess with. You should consider it to be a great honor that we're willing to talk to you. Mario said as he smoked his cigar and rudely blew out a big puff of smoke at Kevin's face. Stop treating yourself as someone important. If it wasn't for Carson, you would have been thrown out of here by those bouncers. You better believe that I can get you out of this room with just one sentence. The conversation between the three of them became louder and louder, causing others to look at them one after another. Soon, many of the people on the second floor had turned to look at them and started discussing amongst themselves in confusion. Who is this person? How could he actually dare to mess with Kurt Eubanks and Mario Kessler? One of the onlookers said in disbelief. Didn't you hear him say that he had just arrived here in DC? Look at his clothes. I wonder where he came from. The person beside him added. Looks like there's going to be a good show tonight. I just saw him and Drew Goodwin having a tense confrontation earlier downstairs. Another man revealed. What? Are you serious? Looks like he's dead set on this night ending badly for him. A woman sneered. Despite hearing all of this chatter, Kevin completely ignored the opinions of those people. Instead, his eyes stopped on Carson Murphy, who was sitting on the sofa without any intention of stopping his friends. Actually, if either of you really has the strength, you don't have to care about offending Carson. To be honest, we just met tonight, so I'm not really all that familiar with him either. Also, I really want to see how the two of you are going to chase me out of here. Kevin didn't want to be polite with these people any longer. No matter how good he was at holding in his temper, there was a limit to the amount of disrespect that he was willing to endure. These spoiled rich kids were all born and raised here in Washington, so it was natural for them to join together in bullying an outsider like him. But even with this advantage, could any of them really stand a chance against him? On the second floor of the nightclub, Carson Murphy introduced Kevin to his childhood friends, Kurt Eubanks and Mario Kessler. Thinking that Kevin was nothing but an arrogant outsider, Mario and the surrounding crowd started making fun of him. At first, Kevin tried to take the high road and play nice, but amidst the persistent bullying from these spoiled rich kids, he finally had enough and dared the two men to chase him out of the nightclub. With that, Kevin completely ignored Kurt Eubanks and walked past him with his drink in his hand. He then found an empty seat on a sofa to sit down. "I'll just sit here and wait. You can use whatever method you want. So let's see if you can chase me out of this nightclub or not." Kevin took a sip of his drink and glanced coldly at the two of them. This arrogant display shocked everyone present as Carson Murphy and the other two men's faces immediately turned gloomy. "Kyle, what do you think about this man? Is he your friend or something?" Mario Kessler squinted his eyes and asked Kyle Thompson, who was standing beside him. Kyle had been following Kevin closely ever since they entered the nightclub. Mario could tell that Kyle had known Kevin longer than Carson had known him, and Mario wanted to find out more about this rude newcomer. Moreover, Kyle had already been to Washington, D.C. before, and during those visits, Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks had met him twice. That being said, due to the friendship between Herman Thompson and their grandfathers, they knew very well that Kyle was the young heir of a powerful family. Still, given that the current foundation of the Thompson family was far away in the Midwest, Kyle Thompson was at most a big fish from a small pond when he came to D.C. Kurt Eubanks and the others weren't really overly intimidated by him or his connections. However, what gave them pause was the fact that Kyle Thompson remained under the protection of his grandfather. Although Herman Thompson had long since retired and hadn't been back to D.C. for many years, the mention of his name alone was still more than enough to rattle anyone in the city. Therefore, before Mario Kessler or Kurt Eubanks went after Kevin, it was necessary for them to understand the reason behind Kyle Thompson's attitude towards this man first. It wasn't because anyone from the Kessler or the Eubanks family was particularly afraid of offending the Thompson family. Rather, it was just that if the quarreling among the younger generation would end up affecting the relationships among the older generation, the two of them would surely have some explaining to do later. Just then, Carson Murphy left the company of the two women beside him and stood next to Mario Kessler. He then slightly raised his head and looked disdainfully at Kevin, fully displaying his stance on the matter. The atmosphere in the room became more and more serious as the animosity between these young men seemed to grow by the minute. In line with this, the people in the surrounding crowd who were enjoying themselves on the dance floor earlier had tactfully quieted down, and even the volume of the music that was before blasting loudly had been lowered. At the same time, many people gathered together on the other side of the room. This was because they were afraid of getting hurt if Carson Murphy and the other two would get into a scuffle with Kevin. After a few seconds of silence, Carson turned to Kyle and advised him, "Kyle, you're a smart man. As your friend, I don't want you to make any mistakes tonight that you'll regret later on. Don't let this outsider affect the relationship between us. I think even your grandfather would agree with me on this." "So, what's the deal between you and him? Are you choosing the outsider over our friendship? Think of how much you'd lose compared to what you might gain." Mario also hinted in a subtle way. Kyle looked at the three of them and then looked at Kevin. His face then revealed an indescribable smile. "I really don't understand why you're doing this. Tonight's incident was clearly just a small matter, so why did you have to turn this into such a big issue and risk straining your relationship with Mr. Williams? Perhaps my decision will shock you." "Kyle," Kevin suddenly interrupted him, "this is a matter between me and them, so there's no need for you to interfere. Besides, I just want to see what these guys are all about." "Are you really not afraid of death?" A cold light had already risen in Kurt Eubanks' eyes. It wasn't difficult to tell from his gradually twisting face how heavy the fury in his heart was at the moment. "I do have my heart set on the possibility of facing death at any moment, but in this case, I'm not worried." Kevin didn't even look at them as he poured himself another drink from the bottle on the table. Kyle was about to say something. "Mr. Williams, Kyle, I already told you that it's none of your business. If something happens, I will take full responsibility and explain myself to your grandfather. Kevin waved his hand as he didn't want to give Kyle any chance to speak. Deep down, Kevin already knew what he was thinking. It was just that he didn't want the relationship between the Thompson and Murphy families to be affected because of him. Given this, Kevin knew his own limitations. He didn't want to be responsible for causing a strain between Herman Thompson and Donald Murphy either. As such, he had to be mindful about doing just enough to teach these spoiled rich kids a lesson. You don't want Kyle to interfere? You may be a reckless fool, but I respect your bravery. Mario's tone suddenly became several times louder as he suddenly shouted, Throw this man out of the club! As soon as he finished speaking, a few of Mario Kessler's entourage rushed over. They then rolled up their sleeves aggressively and prepared to attack. However, even before they could do anything, a man's scream was suddenly heard, then quickly followed by 3 others. When everyone looked, they saw 4 men lying on the floor holding their faces as they winced in pain and spit out some blood. Kevin's move really shocked everyone. No one could clearly see how he did it. Let this serve as a gentle reminder to the 3 of you. No matter how badly you may want to hurt me, that will only be possible if I let you come near me. Kevin's eyes swept across the surrounding crowd. So, who's next? You really have some skills. Mario twisted his wrists and cracked his knuckles. You leave me no choice but to deal with you personally. It's been a while since I've had the chance to give someone a beating. How can I not miss this kind of thing? Kurt sneered as he picked up an empty bottle of wine from the table to use as a weapon. Stop messing around, you two. Although Kyle Thompson didn't want Kevin to get bullied, he also couldn't bear to see Mario Kessler and the others suffer. I'm warning you, Mr. Williams' fighting skills aren't something that you can take lightly. For everyone's sake, I think we should all just forget about what happened tonight. Kyle had seen Kevin fight before. He knew that Mario Kessler and the others wouldn't stand a chance. Kyle, why are you so nervous? I don't believe that this man can even lay a finger on me. Mario glanced at Kyle and continued. Anyway, I don't want to make things any more difficult for you. Just stand aside and watch the show. It's just a small fight. Why are we wasting time with all this chatter? Let's finish this. Once Kurt said this, he raised the wine bottle in his hand to swing it toward Kevin's head. The expressions of these people watching were filled with shock and awe. But who could blame them? Watching these young rich kids fight was a special treat for everyone present. However, everyone other than Kyle Thompson was surprised by what happened next. Before the wine bottle could hit him in the head, Kevin quickly grabbed Kurt Eubanks' arm and slammed it onto the table, causing expensive cigars and wine to scatter all over the floor. Upon seeing this, Kyle Thompson couldn't bear to watch the rest of the action any longer, so he simply turned his head around and closed his eyes. With a loud bang, Kevin then snatched the wine bottle from Kurt Eubanks' hand and kicked him in the head, knocking him to the ground. Ugh! Kurt screamed in pain as blood flowed down from a gash on the top of his head. Who would have thought that Kurt Eubanks' family would so quickly be embarrassed in front of so many people? You're a lunatic! How dare you hit me? Do you know who I am? For that, I'm going to kill you tonight. Kurt covered his head with his hand and struggled with all of his might to get back up. However, Kevin used his foot to firmly step on his chest. Since he was young, Kurt Eubanks had never been beaten up and was rarely even scolded. Now that he was being stepped on, he felt as if his entire dignity had been crushed. And this blow couldn't compare to any form of physical pain. Kurt! Mario recovered from his shock and wanted to jump over to save Kurt Eubanks from any further punishment from Kevin. Unfortunately, he didn't have the strength or speed to do so. With a wave of his hand, Kevin knocked Mario Kessler's incoming fist away. Using his other hand, he then punched him hard in the face. Mario Kessler was left in a daze by this as blood came out of his mouth and nose. And after circling around in the same place twice, he fell to the ground. However, Kevin didn't want to let him go so easily. He then grabbed Mario's head and pressed it against a table. At first, Mario was still trying his best to resist, but Kevin's strength proved too much for him to break free. After a few attempts, he became disheartened enough to give up. Meanwhile, Kurt Eubanks had used this distraction to pick up a broken wine bottle from the floor and move forward, intent on stabbing Kevin with the sharp edge. But just as he was able to get back up, Kevin had already seen him from the corner of his eye and promptly knocked him back down again, with a punch to the stomach. With that, Kevin looked at everyone to see if anyone else was willing to come forward to fight him. Who could have imagined that someone would really dare to humiliate these two men like this? How are you guys feeling? Have you finally learned your lesson? Kevin asked casually as he dusted off his clothes.
You bastard!
The only way you'll get out of this situation is if you finish me off right this instant. Otherwise, not only will I kill you, but I'll also hunt down all your family and friends. Kurt's heart was burning with so much anger that he had forgotten about any pain from earlier. At the moment, his mind was only consumed by thoughts of how to kill Kevin. Don't be so stubborn. Kevin sat down on the sofa and poured himself another drink. If you insist, we have plenty of time to settle that matter later. After all, the night is still far from over. Carson stepped forward and said, "What else are you planning to do, Kevin? You've already caused a huge disturbance tonight. For that, the Kessler and Eubanks families will never let you get away with hurting these men. That being said, don't think that you can rely on the Murphy family for protection just because you've spoken with my grandfather. In fact, even Grandpa Thompson might not be able to save you from this mess." Carson's heart was filled with sudden alarm. He was completely shocked by Kevin's ruthlessness. In any case, he couldn't guarantee whether Kevin would survive until the end of the night. But if he did, Carson Murphy was now sure that Kevin was definitely someone he couldn't take lightly in the future. "What a load of crap coming from you. When did I ever ask the Murphy family to protect me? Look around you. Those who didn't want to get hit immediately moved aside, didn't they?" Kevin roared angrily. "Besides, I've barely even done anything to your arrogant friends. So if you know what's good for you, then you better run along like the rest of them." "You..." Carson clenched his fist tightly and gritted his teeth. However, it seemed that his words were stuck in his throat. Upon hearing this, the people watching instantly looked at Kevin with fear. Where did this ruthless outsider come from? However, Kevin didn't have the time or energy to care about what they were thinking at this point. He slowly stood up from the sofa and walked over to Mario Kessler. He then grabbed his hair, forcing Mario to look up at him. "Do you still want to kill me now? If you still have this thought, just say it. I'll make sure to give you a chance to settle this matter to your heart's content." After easily taking care of Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks, Kevin casually poured himself another drink. But Carson Murphy scolded Kevin for causing such a scene tonight, telling him that he shouldn't expect any protection after this stunt. Kevin fired back at him, saying that he had never sought the Murphy family's protection. Mario Kessler looked up at him and warned him that he had dug his own grave and that Kevin had better kill him now if he didn't want to face the consequences. "You're a dead man," Mario said as his eyes were full of rage. He looked as though he wanted to strangle Kevin to death. "It seems like I have not had enough fun yet." Just as Kevin finished his words, a cigarette butt suddenly was pushed into Mario Kessler's arm. While he screamed like a pig being slaughtered, Kevin forcefully lifted him up from the ground and kicked him hard in the leg. With a puff, Mario Kessler actually fell to his knees in front of Kevin. "I'm not a violent person, and I have no grudges with you. There was no need for something like this to happen. But you are too stupid. But if you are willing to lower your head and admit your mistake, I can let you two go tonight," Kevin said calmly. "You want me to apologize to you? Dream on!" Due to the intense pain, Mario Kessler's face was twisted, but his temper was still just as arrogant and unyielding. "Then I'll teach you a lesson tonight." A cold light flashed in Kevin's eyes. His right hand formed the shape of a claw and squeezed hard on Mario Kessler's shoulder. Mario Kessler screamed in pain 10 times more than he had earlier, as a loud cracking sound could be heard coming from his shoulder. He kept twitching up and down, and his right hand was hanging limply at his side. This is only the beginning. I will do the same to your left arm. Even your legs will suffer the same fate. If you want this to end before getting to that point, you can apologize now. Kevin's face revealed a smile as if he was talking about something completely ordinary. Hearing this, the people watching on from the side felt their scalps go numb. There was no one in this world who dared to be so foolishly brave. No matter how strong one was, fear was something that one was born with. It was impossible to get rid of it completely. Some people dared to do anything because they had never encountered anything that could make them feel fear. Facing fear and defeating it, these were only the kinds of platitudes that adults use to coax children, and that was currently the case for Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks. In the past, people feared the power behind them, so they were used to being arrogant ever since they were young. But tonight, Kevin didn't back down before them. He had just stepped into this world not long ago, and he had only arrived after he'd taken the entirety of the Midwest under his control, and yet he was still not as arrogant as these men. Now that he had heard these ruthless words, as well as felt the intense pain to both his dignity and his body, Mario Kessler could no longer act arrogantly in front of Kevin. In Mario Kessler's mind, Kevin was a mad dog. The forces behind him could never save him. Besides lowering his head, there was no other way to deal with this but death. Besides that, he had no other choice. A few seconds later, Kevin narrowed his eyes and placed his hand on Mario Kessler's other arm. Just as he was about to do the same thing he had done to his other shoulder, Mario Kessler's body trembled. Don't do it. I was wrong, he stammered. What did you say? There are too many people here. I can't hear you clearly. Kevin did not withdraw his hand as he leaned in closer. Didn't Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks claim to look down on a nobody from a different city like him? Kevin was going to face them head on, trampling all of their so-called dignity. I was wrong. Please let me go. Mario Kessler gritted his teeth and said more loudly this time. His tone was full of humiliation. The people watching this all unfold didn't even dare to speak. They didn't even dare to breathe. They looked at the scene in front of them with fear and disbelief. It's good that you know your mistake, but if you knew this earlier, why did you do it in the first place? Kevin patted his shoulder a few times. Don't provoke me in the future. Do you hear me? Otherwise, you will only end up in an even more miserable state. Mario Kessler gritted his teeth and did not say anything. Did he want him to pretend that this had never happened? That was absolutely impossible. Kevin knew this very well. He could clearly feel the hostility coming from Mario Kessler's body, as well as the intense hatred in Kurt Eubanks' eyes. This was a situation that had been carved into his bones by hatred. In the future, the two of them would definitely find ways to cause trouble for him, but now that things had progressed to this stage, it was impossible for Kevin to actually kill the two of them here in front of all of these people. So you've already admitted your mistake. What about you? Do you not have anything else to say? Kevin raised his eyebrows and directed his question towards Kurt Eubanks. No matter how they or their two families came to find trouble with him in the future, he had to put them in their rightful places tonight. Kevin, what else do you want to do tonight? Don't tell me you think this hasn't been enough already, Carson said. He couldn't bear it any longer. Kevin had beaten the two of them right in front of Carson and had even seemingly severely injured Mario Kessler. This had already caused Carson to lose some respect in the eyes of the other club patrons. If he still didn't step up to stop Kevin, the three of them would become the laughingstock of Washington, D.C. after tonight. Someone has to admit his mistake when he's wrong, right? Kevin shrugged his shoulders slightly. I don't want to have to do anything else tonight, but I want to clarify one thing. I won't cause trouble, but I'm not afraid of trouble. If you want to try to step all over me, then you have to know if you have the ability to do so first. Kevin, I admit you have guts, but don't forget this is DC. Our families are powerful and well-connected. Any single one of our 3 families could crush you. Take advantage of the fact that there is still a potential turning point in this matter. Don't let the situation get any worse. Carson said as he subconsciously swallowed. It was impossible for him to not feel some fear when facing Kevin. The fierceness that Kevin showed them tonight had taught them all a good lesson. Well, I'm not afraid to tell you this clearly. If it wasn't for Herman Thompson and your grandfather, you would need to watch your back. Don't test my patience, Kevin said as he smacked his lips a few times and turned around to look at Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks. If you two have anything else to say, now is the time, he added. After Kevin finished speaking, he sat down on the sofa and took out his phone to send a message to someone. Kurt Eubanks put his hand on the table and forced himself to stand up. "Give me your phone," he said forcefully. Mario Kessler held back the pain radiating throughout his body and stood up. As the two of them moved, everyone realized that something was wrong. Meanwhile, inside the Salix Leaf Complex in Chicago, Lily looked at the documents on the table. A look of worry appeared on her face and her brows were tightly knitted together. "It's getting late, Lily. You should get some rest. You still have to go into the company tomorrow," Rachel said as she carried a bowl of fruit over to her, trying to sound persuasive. Since Dorothy had been rescued by Kevin, she had been locked up in her room for 2 days. Then she took out a huge chunk of her savings and bought a house of her own to move into. So now, only Lily and Rachel were left in the apartment. "No, there are still a lot of documents that I need to go through. There are a few that need to be handed over to Sandra Wilson tomorrow morning," Lily replied without raising her head. In the past, when the Jones family was still around, she had dealt with a lot of documents and emails in her company on a daily basis. But the total amount was nowhere near as large as with the Williams Company. Therefore, Lily did not dare to be careless. After all, this was Kevin's company and he was putting his trust in her. "How is everything going? Is there anything you need my help with?" Rachel asked. She hesitated for a moment but still did not finish what she was thinking. In fact, she was very clear about the situation at the Williams Company. Today, she, Tyler Dawn, and the others saw it clearly in Kevin's office. There were many proud and arrogant people in the highest levels of the company. Lily, a woman, wanted to subdue all of them. It was hard for an outsider to imagine how difficult that would be. "It's not a big deal. I can take care of it." Lily forcefully pursed her lips. She was not a stubborn person. No one knew better than she did about the serious problems that existed in the Williams Company. But Lily could not swallow this anger. Rachel was her best friend. It was just that Kevin had helped her once to become the general manager of the Salix Leaf Hotel. Adriana Wright was a woman. How was she able to manage her company so well? Why couldn't she do the same thing? "Lily, the Williams Company is different from other companies. Don't put too much pressure on yourself." Rachel did not know what to say to comfort her. At the same time, in the mansion of the Swinton family in St. Louis, Alan Williams and Richard Swinton were sitting together. The two of them, who were getting older, might not be able to sleep through the night, but that didn't mean that they were too old to stay up late to play chess in the study. Alan Williams was holding a teacup in his hand and his eyes were fixed on the chessboard.
"There's news from Washington, D.C. Kevin has met up with Herman Thompson,"
Richard Swinton said as he moved a black knight on the board. Suddenly, the entire situation changed. The black chess piece that was originally surrounded by white chess pieces seemed to have been reborn in an instant. "Well, it's not my business, so he will have to deal with the consequences on his own." Alan Williams' expression did not change at all. He witnessed the change in the game and moved to white rook. This action immediately destroyed the hope that the black piece just had. Richard Swinton let out a sigh. His brows furrowed and he leaned back in his chair. Although the Swinton family rarely had enemies in St. Louis, Washington, D.C. was different. Richard's connections there were far fewer and farther between. Compared to the ties the Swinton family had in the Midwest, it was like a drop in the ocean.
I believe in Kevin,
Richard Swinton finally said after thinking for a long time. It's just completely different there. I also believe in Kevin, of course, but he is still so young compared to all those old foxes in D.C. Alan replied as he sat back in his chair and secretly worried about his son's fate in a new and distant city. Alan Williams and Richard Swinton were playing chess late at night in the study when Richard Swinton told him that Kevin had arrived in Washington, D.C., and had met up with Herman Thompson. Alan told him that it was not his concern, to which Richard told him that he believed in Kevin. Alan told him that he believed in his son too, but that Kevin is still so young and that he was facing a formidable challenge in all the older, experienced politicians in D.C. It's easy to be impulsive when you're young. Sometimes it's easy to make mistakes when you're impulsive. Some mistakes can't be turned back after you make them, Alan Williams added without taking his eyes off the chessboard as if he was deep in thought. Parents are worried when their children travel hundreds of miles from home. Sometimes the younger generation cannot possibly understand the fears and concerns of their parents. Meanwhile, in the nightclub in Washington, the injury to Mario Kessler's head had been bandaged by a few young women who were also medical students. No one left, and no one wanted to miss whatever other lively scene might play out tonight. Kevin acted as if nothing had happened and sat on the sofa drinking slowly. Very soon, hurried footsteps came from outside the door and grabbed everyone's attention. A dozen men and women came in, and they were all wearing the same uniform. Kurt Eubanks. The leader of the group walked quickly over to Kurt Eubanks and said, I received a call that someone was trying to hurt you.
It's him.
Kurt Eubanks nodded and looked at Kevin. The man nodded slightly and glanced at the ground. Then he immediately walked to Kevin with his men. Is this true? The man frowned slightly and looked down at Kevin and asked. I was just defending myself. I didn't mean to hurt him. Kevin put down the glass in his hand and straightened his clothes. He stood up casually from the sofa. That may be true, but we're going to have to bring you in for questioning either way. On the surface, the man seemed to be speaking in an official manner, but he did not ask about the ins and outs of the matter at all. It seemed like he was intent on directly pinning the blame on Kevin. Kevin's gaze swept across the group of people. They were all dressed in uniform, and the person in front of him had a golden symbol on his shoulder. Before you take me away, you should call your superior and ask him what happened, Kevin said. He was not afraid of these supposed officers. This reaction shocked everyone. Kurt Eubanks, Carson, and Mario Kessler were all surprised that Kevin would dare to say such a thing, and they did not come back to their senses for a long moment. Of course, they knew the person in the lead. It was Leonard Woodson, an official from a certain organization in D.C. He had helped the three of them deal with many troublesome matters in the past. Leonard Woodson stared into Kevin's eyes, as if he wanted to see where his confidence came from. Especially in a city like Washington, D.C., things were messy. Perhaps the ordinary people at the bottom were more relaxed because they could live their lives in ignorance while having no idea of what happened at the highest levels of the city. These people understood that they had no power and would not easily go looking for trouble. However, the group of people at the top of the pyramid was much more comfortable. Their names were already known by everyone. Many times they did not need to worry about dealing with things, and their subordinates could handle simple matters without even being ordered to do so. Normally, there would not be a blind young man who would offend them without any regard for his own life, as was apparently the case here tonight. The most embarrassing ones were the people in the middle. They had more power and influence than ordinary people, but they had a unique kind of arrogance in their hearts. However, arrogance couldn't be boundless. There would always be a layer of people above them who could suppress them at all times. If a brick fell from the sky in a place like Washington, D.C., it could easily crush a person like Leonard Woodson. After all, he had to consider his future. Helping Kurt Eubanks and the others deal with things that they did not want to deal with themselves was little more than an occupational hazard. He was well aware of the strength behind the three of them. But at this moment, Leonard Woodson did not dare to be careless. Kevin's demeanor was too calm. It even gave Leonard the feeling that none of them had even really made Kevin bat an eye.
"Sir, you have to be reasonable. These gentlemen are clearly injured right now. No matter what position you may consider yourself to be in, I think it's reasonable for me to take you in for questioning."
Leonard Woodson said this politely but firmly to cement his position on the matter. "Seeing your badge, it must not have been easy for you to get to where you are today. Don't be stupid and miss out on your bright future. You wouldn't want to ruin the results of all your hard work." Kevin's reply was very forceful. He faced Leonard and the others head on. Leonard was stunned at first. Then he quickly came back to his senses.
"I need to do my job,"
Leonard replied. He struggled for a moment to respond forcefully, but he did not believe that Kevin could possibly have the ability to truly go up against these three men and their families. Leonard thought that, despite his incredible confidence, this young man must simply be unaware of what he was up against. Leonard waved his hand and two people walked over from behind him. They waved the handcuffs in their hands. The people around were disappointed when they saw this. In the beginning, Kevin was so strong that they thought this would truly be something to watch. They did not expect it to be such a short-lived show. "You still have time to think about this. Do you really want to do this? Sometimes mistakes made cannot be made up for later." Kevin just glanced at the two of them and said this indifferently.
"Cut the crap. Take him away,"
Leonard said as his face darkened. He immediately gave the order. At that moment, a loud shout suddenly came from just outside the door.
"I want to see who dares to do that."
It was like a sudden clap of thunder. Everyone jumped and looked toward where the sound came from. A man in a suit and leather boots walked over quickly with two people following closely behind. The man in the lead looked around with an imposing appearance. He completely ignored Carson and the others and walked up to Kevin with a smile. "I'm not too late, am I?" "You're just in time," Kevin answered with a wry smile.
"Who are you? You'd better not interfere with our business,"
Leonard Woodson started to say. The man didn't even look at Leonard and immediately interrupted him, saying, "I don't want to say anything to you. I'm here now. No one can touch my brother." Such rude behavior made Leonard Woodson incensed. "I don't care who these guys are. This man assaulted people here tonight. He isn't leaving here unless it is with us to go in for questioning." Carson walked up to Leonard Woodson and looked at him forcefully. He didn't care whether he would offend the Thompson family or not. If worst came to worst, he would have his family ask for Herman Thompson's forgiveness later if things got out of hand tonight. Carson didn't believe that there would be anyone in the city who would stand up to their three families.
"Sir, you can clearly see it right in front of you. The victims are all present, and there are surveillance cameras all over the place that can be put into evidence. Can you please not try to cover up for criminals?"
Leonard said. He was a smart person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have climbed to his current position at such a young age. At first, he was worried that the person who had suddenly appeared was someone he could not afford to offend. However, Carson's attitude was so firm. With the support of the three families, he had all the confidence he needed to stand firm. The man spoke very casually, as if he wasn't afraid of the influence of the three families at all, saying, "Don't you know that there is always someone higher up the ladder than you? Now get the hell out of here. I won't dwell on the mistakes you made when you offended my brother." "Do you not understand who we are? Why do you still want to protect him after all that he's done to us?" Carson said as he furrowed his brows. Still, he had a bad feeling about this because he couldn't see through this man in front of him. "I know exactly who you are, and I'm still confused about why you would dare to speak up in front of me." A disdainful smile appeared on the man's face. Everyone was shocked by his words. He actually dared to say that their 3 families did not intimidate him? What kind of person would be able to say such a thing?
Who exactly are you? Aren't you afraid that you're biting off a bit more than you can chew when you say things like that?
Kurt Eubanks stared at the man while gnashing his teeth in anger.
Listen carefully. My name is Jake Morris. If you have the guts, go back and tell your fathers that you dared to speak this way to me.
Jake Morris roared with confidence. However, none of the people who heard him dared to stand up and say anything else. Most of them had their heads buzzing at this moment. Even those who had been in Washington, D.C. for a very long time might not be able to come into contact with the Morris family unless the Morris family deemed them worthy. It was not that they were too mysterious, but that the status of the Morris family was so high, even for other elites. The Morris family was the most elite among all the other groups on the pyramid. The people gathered around watching the spectacle could not recover from their shock. However, there were naturally smart people who were confused, and some of them had already reacted.
You? Who did you say you are?
Carson stammered. He did not dare to speak too loudly now, his confidence having waned considerably. This was too ridiculous. He clearly remembered how his family had described the situation to him. Kevin was just a kid from Chicago. He didn't have any influence in Washington, D.C. The reason Herman Thompson came to Washington, D.C. in the first place was to persuade Donald Murphy to take care of him. If his family and the other 2 families were considered to be local snakes, just the name of the Morris family conjured images of a massive alligator.
I thought you were very powerful. I didn't expect you to become so weak so quickly.
Jake Morris shook his head in disdain.
Donald Murphy is such a famous figure, but I never thought that his son would be a pale shadow of him. If you were to be the leader of your family's younger generation, I don't think your family will have a very long way to go in the future.
Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks' expressions were extremely ugly. The arrogance and hatred they had toward Kevin earlier had become even deeper. But now, the fear in their hearts had become stronger knowing that Kevin was connected to Jake Morris. As Mario, Kurt, and Carson stood behind the officer Leonard Woodson, who was demanding that Kevin follow him to come for questioning, a mysterious figure walked into the nightclub calling Kevin his brother and telling everyone to back off. Everyone was confused. Kevin was a nobody with no connections in D.C. All were shocked to learn that the man was Jake Morris.
No, how is this possible?
Carson's legs went soft and he took a few steps back while shaking his head. Seeing that the atmosphere in the room had been darkened by Jake Morris, Kevin's mouth showed a slight smile. He walked up to Leonard Woodson and casually helped him straighten his tie. I told you before, you have to be smart. One wrong step might put you in a position where you will be unable to lift your head to the sky for the rest of your life. Kevin earnestly tried to convince Leonard Woodson. He looked like a teacher who was scolding one of his students. Leonard Woodson stuttered before finally falling silent, feeling nothing but regret in his heart. Compared to Mario Kessler's, Carson Murphy's, and Kurt Eubanks' families, Leonard knew that the Morris family was on a completely different level. Why did he have to rush over to help Carson in the first place? Or why didn't he just listen to what Kevin said? He had missed all the signs. Now, tell me, do you still want to take me away? The matter hasn't been completely resolved yet, has it? Kevin's tone was very calm, as if he was asking earnestly.
The matter, you...
Leonard Woodson revealed a smile that was uglier than crying.
Sir,
he stammered. All right, I won't make things too difficult for you. Take your people back. You can pretend that you haven't been here tonight. We don't need you for us to have our fun, Kevin said generously as he tidied his collar for him. But your eyes should be a little brighter after that. After all, it's not every day you have such good luck.
I know, yes.
Leonard Woodson felt like he had been pardoned and quickly left the room with his men. When he left, he could only be described as practically running away. The atmosphere in the room fell further. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Suddenly, Kevin slapped his leg hard a few times. "I'm sorry to disturb you guys tonight, but it's late. You guys should go back and get some rest. I'll treat you guys to drinks when I have the time some other night." How could they not understand what Kevin meant? However, some of the women slowly left with disappointment in their eyes. At first, they thought Kevin was just some country bumpkin. They never expected him to be someone quite so powerful, especially given the presence of someone like Jake Morris. Encountering someone like Jake Morris in a nightclub was like hitting the lottery. If they could build a relationship with him, they would be able to do whatever they wanted in this city. To be able to gain access to the circle of people who follow Jake Morris was incredibly valuable. Unfortunately, they seemed to have missed the opportunity. Soon, only Kevin, Jake Morris, Carson, and the others were left in the private room. Of course, there was also Kyle Thompson, who had been silently standing off to the side since the beginning. "What did the three of you say? Do you still have some time to hang out?" Kevin raised his eyebrows and asked. "It seems that you can't get me out of this private room quite so easily." "Mr. Williams, let's forget about it. They have received their punishment. Their dignity has been trampled by you." Kyle said half of what he wanted to say but did not continue. There were often people who said that if you did not directly experience something, you should not try to persuade others to act in accordance with that experience, because you did not know what they had experienced, so you did not have the right to speak. Similarly, you must stay away from those people who always advise you to be generous and forgiving, because if you are too close to them, you might be implicated. Whether it was those who watched from the sidelines or those who had no choice but to retreat, none of them clearly felt the feelings of the person directly involved. For example, it was not that he did not want to interfere with Kevin tonight. If it was not for Kevin stopping him, he would have stopped Carson and the others from making their mistakes from the very beginning. However, Kevin didn't give him the right to interfere. Therefore, Kyle's heart was filled with regret. Carson was his good friend, but Kevin had saved his grandfather and even the entire Thompson family. If Jake Morris hadn't rushed over, he was afraid that the one who would have ended up in such a miserable state would have been Kevin. This was also the thing that confused Kyle the most. He remembered that the Morris family and Kevin Williams were clearly on opposing sides. So what was going on here? Kevin looked at Kyle and said, "There's no need to say too much. I didn't ask you to interfere earlier. It's because I didn't want to make things too difficult for you. So don't make things difficult for me now, okay?" Of course, Kevin knew what Kyle wanted to say, but he didn't want to accept such an opinion. Kyle opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't say anything. It wasn't because he didn't want to, but because he had no reason to defend Carson and the others. Now he could only blame himself for what had happened. After settling Kyle down, Kevin turned around and looked at Mario Kessler and the other two. He roared, "All of you kneel down." If the three of them were confident before and still had thoughts of getting revenge on Kevin in the future, that was by now drained from them. The three of them slowly knelt on the ground and lowered their heads deeply. They knew very well that Kevin chasing away the others was saving them some face. But tonight's matter was far from over. Kyle Thompson bit his lip tightly, afraid of what Kevin might impulsively do next. Unexpectedly, Kevin did not do anything substantial. He only called Kyle and Jake over to sit down. As for the group of people who came with Jake Morris when Kevin was chasing them away, they received Jake's signal to leave as well. As time passed, Kevin and Jake chatted as if no one else was present. However, Carson, Mario Kessler, and the others were incomparably anxious in their hearts. At this moment, no one knew what kind of situation they would end up in. About 10 minutes later, Kevin's phone suddenly vibrated, but after he hung up, it rang continuously. Jake Morris cleverly picked up a glass of wine and walked to the window. On the surface, he was looking at the bustling night outside, but in fact, he never looked away from Kevin. After hesitating for a moment, Kevin picked up the phone and asked in a stiff tone, "Who is it?"
"You only left for a few hours, and you've already forgotten about me?"
There was a mild tone from the other end of the phone. However, he also directly called out the identity of the person on the phone as none other than Donald Murphy. After learning of this news, Carson suddenly raised his head and a glimmer of hope once again lit up in his despairing eyes. Kevin didn't seem to be surprised by this. He glanced at Carson either intentionally or unintentionally. He turned on the speakerphone and answered, "I'm flattered. I thought it was an unfamiliar phone number, so why are you calling in the middle of the night?" Donald calmly said, "I'm not the only one calling you tonight. I already know what happened. You must be angry now, right?" "You're a straightforward man. I won't beat around the bush with you anymore either." Kevin quickly got to the point. "Since you already know the sequence of events that have unfolded here tonight, you should at least give me an explanation, right? It's impossible for you not to say that I was bullied by your grandson when I first arrived here in D.C. Kevin looked at Carson and the smile on his face became wider and wider. He was not surprised by Donald Murphy's call. How big was the Murphy family in this city? It would be a piece of cake for them to find out his contact details and also to find out what had happened tonight. Kevin hadn't let Carson go. He had been waiting for this phone call.
"It's not certain who will bully who, but it was my grandson who did the wrong thing. I will apologize to you on his behalf. At the same time, I want to clarify one thing with you. You are both young people. It's normal for you to have some small conflicts. But he hasn't taken over the power of the family, so you don't have to worry about what he has to say. He currently doesn't represent the family."
Donald Murphy said this very clearly while also expressing another layer of meaning. "I understand the situation. You can rest assured that I have no ill will toward you. You should get some rest." Kevin hung up the phone in satisfaction. However, he had another thought cross his mind, as expected of an old fox. It was not easy for someone of his status to do things in such an open-minded manner. "Mr. Murphy, you can leave now. You heard what Donald said. It's best to keep a low profile in the future. Who knows when you'll get into trouble and lose your temper? Perhaps the matter won't be resolved so easily next time." Kevin pointed at Carson, then pointed at the doors. He spoke slowly. You really want to let me go?" Carson felt like he was in a dream. He did not expect Kevin to make such a decision even after his grandfather had personally come forward. "If you don't want to leave, you can stay and have a drink with us." Kevin enthusiastically took out an empty glass and poured some wine. Carson hesitated. His eyes swept over Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks. Finally, he gritted his teeth and left quickly. At the same time, in the study of the Murphy family's mansion, Donald Murphy slowly put his phone on the table. "Is he all right?" Herman Thompson asked from a chair off to the side.
"Are you worried about my grandson or about Kevin?"
Donald replied with an expressionless face.
"I am more worried about Kyle than the two of them."
Herman slowly stood up from his chair.
"What do you think about Kevin?" he asked.
"He is experienced and smart, and he also has a fierce aura about him. He is indeed the one you have chosen."
Donald Murphy was stunned for a moment, then smiled bitterly and said in a bad mood,
"I am afraid there are only a few people in the younger generation who can go up against him."
"It seems that you have made your choice,"
Herman said as he suddenly revealed a gratified smile. Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks were still kneeling on the floor in the private room of the club. It was especially uncomfortable for Mario Kessler, for whom the pain from his arm had not completely disappeared. Adding the wound on his head, his vision started to blur as he knelt on the ground. He didn't notice that his whole body was swaying for a while. "Keep your spirits up and stay kneeling," If you dare to move again, be careful that you won't be able to stand up again for the rest of your lives." Kevin reprimanded him without any hesitation. The law of the jungle was cruel in the real world. Previously, Kevin had been bullied by them while enduring the humiliation. Now he was in charge. Mario Kessler and Kurt Eubanks had become meat on the chopping block. Kevin had cornered them and humiliated them, and even Mario and Kurt knew they had no means to fight back. After forcing Mario, Kurt, and Carson to kneel down before him, Kevin received a call from Donald Murphy. He assured Kevin that his grandson did not speak for his family, and so Kevin told him that he was free to go. After hesitating for a moment, Carson looked at the other two and then quickly left the private room of the club. Kevin ruthlessly warned Mario and Kurt not to move. Hearing this, the two of them broke out in a cold sweat and forced themselves to straighten their backs as they remained kneeling. Soon, Kevin's phone rang again along with Mario Kessler's phone. Looking at the unfamiliar number on the screen, Kevin's lips curved up. I wonder who it is this time. The two of them looked at each other, not daring to say what they were thinking. Hello? That one? Kevin asked forcefully. An older woman's voice came from the other end of the phone. Her tone was full of disdain. Who are you? Kevin frowned slightly and asked unhappily.
I believe that's Mario Kessler's mother.
Jake Morris, who was sitting on the sofa, swirled the wine glass in his hand and explained slowly. It was obvious that he had made sufficient preparations for the situation facing the three families before he had arrived. Judging from his tone, the person who just spoke in the background must be Mr. Morris, right? Hello, Mr. Morris, the woman called out. She ignored Kevin and instead talked to Jake Morris directly.
So what if it's me? Don't think that you can easily solve the problem by asking me to step in. In the end, it's your son who provoked my brother,
Jake Morris said without giving her any respect. This made the atmosphere slightly awkward. Then can you please be merciful and let my son go? I will pay you a visit to apologize soon. Also... But before she could finish speaking, Jake Morris walked over and hung up the phone.
It's so annoying to keep dilly-dallying,
Jake complained impatiently. Kevin could not help but laugh. How could he not respect Jake Morris? Mario Kessler clearly became weak after the call ended. He thought he was about to leave safely, but his mother wasn't even allowed to finish her sentence. After a few seconds, another call came in. Kevin continued to ask the same questions as with the previous calls. This time, it was still someone from Mario Kessler's family, his grandfather. You haven't gone to bed yet? I thought only young people like us could stay up this late. I didn't expect you to be so old yet so energetic, Kevin said as he pretended to be very surprised.
Give the phone to Mr. Morris. You are not qualified to talk to me, the man said rudely.
Jake Morris instantly roared.
Why should I talk to an old man like you? I've already told your daughter that if you want to save someone, you have to convince my brother to calm down. Otherwise, I don't think you need to waste your breath. You brought your family into this, and now you want to talk to me about it?
Putting aside the fact that he had yet to fully control the family, and even had an opponent for that position in Calvin Morris, the resources in Jake Morris's hands were not something that others should take lightly. Furthermore, as the saying goes, the shadow of a man's name is like the shadow of a tree. The shade grew longer and stronger as the day went on.
Kevin, what do you want? You've been waiting for my call, and now that your wish has been fulfilled, why aren't you letting him go?
He asked forcefully. Why should I listen to you? Who do you think you are? You want me to let your grandson go just because you picked up the phone and called me? Kevin retorted bluntly. In fact, what he wanted was very simple. The mistakes of the younger generation could be covered up by the ignorance of the younger generation, but the older generation had to step forward and grant him justice. However, Mario Kessler's grandfather didn't seem to have any sincerity in his voice.
Kevin, don't think that you can do whatever you want just because you have Mr. Morris's support. If you want to make a scene, you have to know who your opponent is. Don't forget that your wife and friends are still in Chicago. It is in your best interest not to make too much of a commotion. If you really want to let this escalate to a life and death struggle, it would be bad if those close to you are not able to get off the stage in time.
The man's words were not only cold, but also threatening. However, the only thing the man could do was lower his head and compromise. There were always proud and arrogant people in the world. The Kessler family had been able to prosper in Washington, D.C. for so many years. As such, the members of their family were usually arrogant and foolish. This could be seen from Mario Kessler all the way up to the oldest generation. His power and arrogance had unknowingly turned into a sharp sword. It penetrated deeply into Kevin's heart, causing him to frown slightly. An indescribable fury ignited in the depths of his heart once again. "Do you mean to tell me that I'm in the wrong?" Kevin was so angry that he almost laughed. "Do you know what your grandson wanted to do tonight? If Jake Morris hadn't come, or if I was not strong enough?"
"I don't care what it is. I just want to say one thing,"
he replied without hesitation.
"The people of my family are not allowed to be stepped on by others. Period. You have touched my grandson tonight. This has already crossed the line. If you still don't turn back and get lost then, I promise that from now on, you won't be able to move a single step in Washington, D.C. without constantly looking over your shoulder."
It was as if no matter what happened, even if Mario Kessler was in Kevin's hands right now, an accident could happen at any time. It seems like there is no more room for negotiation. Kevin's expression became more and more sinister, as dark as the sky before a storm.
"We can definitely talk about it, but it depends on how sincere you are,"
he replied, not realizing what Kevin's tone meant. He even thought that Kevin was afraid. This might be a result of the innate sense of superiority that he had. However, sometimes this feeling was just a lie. He could not be blamed. After all, this was the first time he had confronted Kevin face to face. He had no idea what Kevin was capable of or where he had come from. If he lowered his head and said something nice, perhaps Kevin would really let them go. Kevin took a few deep breaths in a row without saying a word. He really couldn't figure out how an old man was still as immature as a young man. To be honest, Kevin really wanted to kill Mario Kessler right now just in order to prove to this man that he really had the courage. Is it really that difficult to make your family lower their heads? Why do you insist on turning this matter into an irreparable situation? Kevin murmured, and his eyes were filled with a strong murderous look as he stared at Mario Kessler.
"You want my family to lower our heads? I think that you are just dreaming, young man. My family is superior in every way to you. What kind of trash are you anyway? You are just a piece of trash that was chased out of the family tree by your own uncle."
With the strength of his family, it was extremely easy for him to investigate Kevin's past.
"Now, obediently release my grandson and come here to my home to beg for forgiveness. And the only reason I'm willing to be so lenient is because of Mr. Morris. This is the biggest concession we can make,"
he said stiffly. "I would like to see you try to make me. But let me ask you a question. What would happen if you, an old man, experienced the pain of losing your grandson in your later years?" Kevin asked as his face grew cold. After that, he didn't have any chance for a rebuttal and immediately hung up the phone. Jake Morris and Kyle Thompson sat off to the side and didn't say anything. They just sat there and watched while drinking wine. However, everyone present could clearly feel that the atmosphere around Kevin's body had dropped precipitously. It even gave everyone near him a rush of cold air in which to shiver. After a long time, Kevin closed his eyes for a moment and then quickly opened them again. His expression changed dramatically. If it was said that he was like a gentle and sunny day before, now he was like the coldest winter imaginable. Slowly, he walked up to the front of Mario Kessler and looked down at him.
What are you gonna do?
Mario Kessler asked hesitantly, as he was deeply disturbed by Kevin's facial expression. He did not care about the pain in his arm anymore and immediately fell forward, his legs weak and struggling. He desperately wanted to escape from this room. He could clearly feel that Kevin was looking at him not like he was a person, but as if he was looking at an animal.
My grandfather already called you. What else do you want? Kevin, you better not act recklessly. You're still a young man and can't afford to walk this path yet.
Mario Kessler was flustered and did not even know what he was saying. Is your grandfather's call really of any use? Tonight, I really want to see how strong your family is. Your grandfather is so old, yet he values his reputation so much. As his grandson, you must not be the one responsible for ruining the reputation of your family. Kevin slowly walked toward Mario Kessler as he spoke. His body was emitting an extremely strong aura. Not to mention Kurt Eubanks, who was still kneeling on the ground. Even Jake Morris, who was standing beside him, could not help but shift his weight uneasily. Is it that difficult to make your family admit your mistake? Since that old man values his reputation so much, he's so certain that I wouldn't dare to touch you. But tonight, I will give him a good lesson at an old age. Let the people who are watching here tonight see if I dare to touch you, Kevin said slowly. He had already walked up to Mario Kessler and kicked his chest. Just the strength of a simple kick was enough to make Mario Kessler's body shake in pain. His breath caught in his throat, but he still could not speak. He waved his hands and feet at the same time, struggling futilely, while fearing he might be living his last moments. After Mario Kessler's grandfather called Kevin, evidently expecting a speedy resolution to his grandson's predicament, Kevin told him that he was not beholden to the disrespectful man's wishes. After hanging up the phone, Kevin walked up to Mario Kessler, who was kneeling on the floor in front of him, and kicked him hard in the chest, causing Mario Kessler to double over in pain. Then, Kevin quickly bent down and swung his right hand. A loud slap was heard echoing in the private room. Mario Kessler's face became red and swollen after a few hard slaps. Blood flowed out of his mouth and nose. However, this was not all that Kevin did. He grabbed Mario Kessler's shirt and lifted him up from the ground. He dragged him over to the window in a rough way. On the surface, they were on the second floor of the nightclub, but that was only the number shown on the elevator. In fact, they were on the second floor of an extension of the building. The cool breeze of the night blew through the window, reducing the anger in Kevin's heart by only just a bit. Jump! Kevin only slightly raised his chin and lightly spat out a single word.
What did you say?
Mario Kessler was instantly stunned. His eyes subconsciously looked down. Below him, more than 40 feet down, was a floor that had been newly tiled. Falling from this height to such a hard surface would surely break several bones at the very least. I told you to jump down from here. Don't force me to throw you, because if I do it and throw you down there, I will definitely do it with enough force to kill you. But if you jump down yourself, with any luck, you should be able to walk away with only about a dozen broken bones, Kevin said with an expressionless face. Kyle Thompson could no longer sit still after hearing this. He quickly walked over to Kevin's side from the sofa.
Mr. Williams, you can't do this. That is a far drop. Mario Kessler could very possibly die. Tonight was just a matter of inadequate respect. There's no need to end human lives. Many people in Washington, D.C. won't be able to sit still if someone like this falls to his death out a window. You have only just arrived in Washington, D.C., and you've already caused a huge amount of trouble. Even Mr. Morris may not be able to protect you if things go badly here. Mr. Williams, you have already won tonight. There's no need.
What do you mean? "There is no need," Kevin rudely interrupted Kyle's words. "I am not competing with anyone. What kind of victory or defeat will there be? Did you not hear how arrogant his grandfather was when he spoke to me earlier? If I don't teach that old man a lesson, people will say that I, Kevin Williams, make threats without backing them up. I will be seen as spineless." Kyle said, "But there's no need to kill Mario Kessler. There are still so many other ways to make his family suffer. But this is simply going too far." Kyle's heart was burning with anxiety at the moment. What if Kevin really killed someone? Jake Morris, who was still sitting on the sofa, swirled the wine glass in his hand a few times and said casually,
"He is just a member of a second-rate political family here. His death in this city would barely even make the headlines. If anything happens, we, the Morris family, will easily take care of it. Also, who's to say that Mario Kessler didn't jump off the building to commit suicide because he was so ashamed after someone taught him a lesson in front of everyone tonight? We originally wanted to stop him, but we didn't manage to get to him in time before he jumped."
Kevin glanced at Jake Morris. He never thought that this guy would support him in such a way. "Did you hear what Mr. Morris said? Jumping is your only option. My patience is limited. Don't try to waste my time anymore," Kevin said as he shifted his gaze back to Mario Kessler. "Do you really not care if I die?" Just by looking at the distance to the ground, it made him, who had a fear of heights, get lightheaded. "You may not die if you jump, but if your grandfather does not come forward and lower his head to me, you will definitely die eventually," Kevin retorted straightforwardly. It seemed that he really did not have any patience. Without any warning, he grabbed Mario Kessler's shoulder and forcefully threw him out of the window. It was said that people could garner unprecedented strength in the face of death, and as such, Mario Kessler actually grabbed the windowsill while struggling to pull himself back inside. "No need to struggle, Mario Kessler. I'll send you on your way." Kevin gently nudged the windowsill that he was holding onto. He fell with a deafening scream. Soon there were sounds coming from downstairs. Kevin and Kyle stood by the window. They could clearly see a large amount of blood pooling on the ground below them. Mario Kessler was motionless, and it was impossible to tell if he was dead or alive. Kyle kept taking deep breaths, but he still couldn't calm himself down. Who would have thought that the rich kids who ran DC for so long would so quickly be reduced to jumping off a building? "Go down and take a look at his condition. If he's not dead, give the hospital a call." Kevin patted Kyle's shoulder a few times. "Don't blame me for this. It's that family of his that dug his grave for him." Of course, Kyle would not pursue the matter right now. Now was not the time to say who was right and who was wrong. He quickly left the private room and ran downstairs. Kevin sat back down on the sofa. Jake Morris hooked his neck with his arm and gave him a thumbs up.
"You are quite generous,"
Jake said, not afraid at all. Instead, his words were full of praise.
"Actually, I feel good that you have such a state of mind. This city is a place full of mutual deception."
Kurt Eubanks, who was still kneeling in the center of the room, was so scared that his face drained of color. He forced himself to kneel with his back perfectly straight. In the eyes of ordinary people, his background and status were already unreachable. But in the eyes of those who were truly at the top of the pyramid, their lives were so lowly that they were not worth mentioning. However, what happened in the nightclub was destined to cause chaos in some circles of Washington, D.C. Many people were shocked when they heard the news, and Kevin's name quickly spread across the city. However, there was one thing that no one had noticed. After such a big commotion, no one in law enforcement actually made any moves. They didn't even send someone out to collect information or question any witnesses. Kevin wasn't a fool. He understood the reason why such a thing had happened. Although he was behaving like a mad dog tonight, the people at the top of the pyramid in DC weren't afraid of him. But they were afraid of Jake Morris, who was sitting right beside him. Until this moment, Kevin had not fully understood the status of the Morris family in Washington, D.C. What happened tonight had fully proved the many ugly sides of society. As long as an organization or family possessed a certain amount of power, it would be able to affect the stability of everything. For example, the 3 families of the men from the nightclub. How could they still live so freely up until this point? Because the families behind them had a certain amount of power, money, and influence. As long as they did not cross an imaginary red line, the people above them would turn a blind eye to their actions. The reason was very simple. However, in the face of powerful strength, the weak side would appear too ordinary and insignificant. But only in very few cases would a person's strength exceed an organization's. In the eyes of the people in the upper echelons of society, the Morris family would be more helpful in regard to their own interests than the other 3 families. As long as they could give a reasonable explanation to ordinary people, they had no reason to panic. However, Kurt Eubanks was the last one to suffer. Compared to Kevin beating him up, what was more terrifying to him was his fate after he left the private room, if he was lucky enough to do so. Mario Kessler's example was right in front of him. Kevin was not a person who would make a big fuss out of nothing. The fear of the unknown had deeply tortured his mind. Soon, Kevin's phone rang again, but it was Herman Thompson's number. This made him frown slightly. After thinking for a moment, Kevin still picked up the phone. "Mr. Thompson, it's so late. Is there anything you need?"
"I thought you wouldn't answer my phone call," Herman said.
He seemed to be in a good mood. "How is that possible? It must be something unusual or urgent for you to call me at this time of night, right?" Kevin asked with a fake smile, no matter what the reason was. On the surface, he still had to portray himself in a certain way.
"Do me a favor and let Kurt Eubanks go. His parents called me personally and asked me to beg you on his behalf,"
Herman said, speaking slowly. "Do you really have to do this? You should know my personality very well by now. I don't really want to take their lives. I just want to set an example." Kevin spoke the truth from the bottom of his heart. He added, "I don't want to make too many enemies when I just arrived here, but I don't want people who don't know the difference between life and death to think that I'm not someone who needs to be taken seriously." Herman paused for a few seconds on the other end of the phone. He sighed deeply.
"I owe his father a favor from way back when. I can't shirk his request this time. Kid, just take it that I owe you."
"All right, I understand. I can be reasonable," Kevin said, although he was still a little disappointed in his heart. His actions tonight seemed crazy, but everything was under his control. Herman Thompson and the others had warned him that Washington, D.C. was a deep pool of water. If he wanted to create a world that belonged to him despite the crowds of others around him, it would be unwise for him to do it step by step. He had to move quickly. No matter what, he had to make his reputation known to everyone who mattered in D.C. as soon as possible.